The frost bit at Sarah Greenwood's cheeks as she stood behind her market stall in Empire City, Nevada, watching the December crowd flow past her like water around a stone, their eyes sliding over her wares without a single pause or moment of consideration. Christmas decorations hung from every storefront along the main street, and the smell of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon drifted through the cold evening air. But none of it brought warmth to the hollow ache in her chest as another hour passed without a single sale. She had been a widow for 2 years now, since the mine collapse that took her husband Thomas, and in those 2 years she had watched herself become invisible in a way that went beyond mere loneliness and settled into something colder and more permanent. The Christmas market was the biggest event Empire City saw all year, drawing people from the surrounding ranches and even from as far as Virginia City. Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this day, baking her late mother's recipes, stitching quilts from fabric scraps she could barely afford, carving wooden toys with hands that cramped from the unfamiliar work. Everything she owned was spread across this table, and everything she owned was being ignored. Women in their fine coats and narrow waists walked past with their husbands, their eyes catching on the more fashionable stalls run by younger women or established merchants. When Sarah tried to call out to passers-by, her voice seemed to die in her throat, swallowed by her own awareness of how she must look to them. Large, plain, wearing a dress 2 seasons out of style because she could not afford better, her face marked by grief and too many lonely nights. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, when Sarah finally accepted what she had known since midday. She would sell nothing today. She would return home to her small cabin on the edge of town with every item she had brought, and she would have no money for the rent that was due in 3 days. The thought made her hands shake as she began to fold a quilt, trying to keep tears from spilling over onto the fabric. She had survived so much already, losing her parents to fever when she was barely 16, marrying Thomas because he was kind and steady even though she knew he did not look at her the way men looked at beautiful women, building a life that was quiet and safe if not passionate. Then losing Thomas too, crushed under tons of rock and earth while she waited at home with his dinner growing cold on the table. She should have been stronger. She should have been smarter. She should have known that a woman like her, with a body that took up too much space and a face that inspired no poetry, would struggle alone in a town that valued appearance and status above all else. The other widows in Empire City had families to fall back on, or they were young and pretty enough to remarry quickly. Sarah had neither advantage, and the weight of that reality pressed down on her shoulders as heavily as the cold December wind. "Excuse me, madam." The voice was deep and courteous, tinged with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. "Are these items for sale?" Sarah looked up, startled from her miserable thoughts, and found herself staring at a man who seemed to have stepped directly out of one of the dime novels that sometimes made their way through town. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained slightly against his wool coat. His face was weathered and tanned, marked by years of outdoor work, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often even though his expression was currently serious. Dark hair showed beneath his hat, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue-green that seemed to catch the last rays of sunlight. He stood with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, and Sarah's first instinct was to look around to see which stall he was actually addressing. "Madam," he repeated, and she realized with a jolt that he was indeed speaking to her. "Yes," she managed, her voice coming out rougher than intended. "Yes, everything here is for sale." The man stepped closer to her stall, his eyes moving slowly across her wares with what appeared to be genuine interest. He picked up one of the wooden horses she had carved, turning it over in his large, calloused hands. "This is fine work," he said, and there was no condescension in his tone, no false politeness. "Real fine. My younger brother had a horse just like this when we were boys, same marking on the forehead." "Thank you," Sarah said, unsure how to respond to actual attention after hours of being ignored. "I carved them myself. I am not a professional woodworker, but I tried to make them sturdy enough for children to play with." "More than sturdy," the man said, setting the horse down carefully and picking up another toy, this one a small wagon with moving wheels. "These have character. Store-bought toys are all smooth and perfect, but these look like they have stories already built into them." He paused, seeming to consider something, then looked directly at her with those remarkable eyes. "Have you sold much today?" The question was so direct, so unexpected that Sarah found herself answering honestly instead of deflecting. "Nothing. I have sold nothing at all." Something flickered across the man's face, an emotion she could not quite identify. Anger, perhaps, but not directed at her. He set the wagon down and straightened to his full height. "What is your price for everything here, the whole lot?" Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I am sorry, what?" "Your whole inventory," he said calmly, gesturing to the table laden with quilts, toys, jams, and the various other items she had brought. "What would you ask for all of it together?" Sarah's mind went blank, unable to process what was happening. "Sir, I do not understand." "Are you mocking me?" The man's expression softened, and he removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture of respect. "No, madam, I am not mocking you. I am offering to buy everything you have not sold today. I need a fair price, and I would appreciate if you would calculate what you hope to earn and tell me that figure." Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This had to be some kind of cruel joke, the sort of thing young men sometimes did to amuse themselves at the expense of women like her. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw only sincerity and something else, something that looked almost like determination. Her hands were trembling as she pulled out the small ledger where she had written down her hoped-for prices, adding numbers in her head with difficulty, because her thoughts kept scattering. "I had hoped for $75, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "That is what I needed to make to cover my expenses." The man nodded once, then reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out bills carefully, then added several more before holding the money out to her. $100, he said. "Your goods are worth it, and I suspect you have more expenses than just the ones you mentioned." Sarah looked at the money in his outstretched hand, and for a moment she could not move. $100 was more than she had seen at once since Thomas died. It was enough to pay her rent for months, to buy supplies to make more goods, to live without the constant gnawing fear of destitution. But accepting it felt wrong somehow, like charity disguised as business, and she had enough pride left to hesitate. "Sir, I cannot accept this. It is too much, and I do not even know who you are or why you would do this." "My name is Lucas Brennan," the man said, keeping his hand extended. "I own a ranch about 15 miles north of here, running cattle mostly. I came into town for supplies and to send some telegrams. As for why I am doing this, let us just say I cannot abide seeing good work go unappreciated, especially when the maker clearly needs the sale." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "And I suspect you have been ignored all day not because your goods are inferior, but because people in this town have shallow eyes and hard hearts." The accuracy of his assessment, delivered in that calm and matter-of-fact tone, broke something open inside Sarah's chest. She felt tears spilling over before she could stop them, hot against her cold cheeks. She turned away quickly, ashamed of her own emotion, but Lucas Brennan's voice followed her. "There is no shame in tears, madam. Lord knows this world gives us enough reason for them." Sarah drew in a shaky breath and forced herself to turn back to him, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "You are very kind, Mr. Brennan, kinder than I have experienced in a very long time." She reached out and took the money from his hand, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. His hands were warm despite the cold, and rough with calluses that spoke of hard work. "I am Sarah Greenwood. I am a widow, in case that matters to your reputation, buying from me." "It does not matter to me in the slightest," Lucas said firmly. "Though I am sorry for your loss. How long have you been widowed?" "2 years, Sarah said, beginning to carefully fold her goods so Lucas could take them. "My husband died in the mine collapse of '61. He was a good man." Lucas nodded solemnly. "I remember hearing about that. Terrible tragedy. More than 30 men lost, if I recall correctly." 32, Sarah said quietly. The number was burned into her memory. She worked in silence for a moment, folding quilts and wrapping jams in paper, then added, "I do not mean to pry, Mr. Brennan, but what will you do with all of these things? They are hardly items a single rancher would need." A small smile touched Lucas's lips, the first she had seen from him, and it transformed his face into something warmer and more approachable. "I have 9 men working on my ranch, several of them with families. Christmas is coming, and I suspect these toys and quilts and jams will make fine gifts. As for what is left over, I know some families in the area who could use help. Your work will go to good homes, Mrs. Greenwood. I can promise you that." The title, the respect in his voice, the simple decency of his explanation, all of it combined to make Sarah feel simultaneously more seen and more vulnerable than she had in years. She finished packing everything carefully into the crates Lucas had retrieved from somewhere, working alongside him in a silence that felt strangely comfortable. He handled her things with care, as though they were valuable rather than the desperate creations of a struggling widow. When everything was loaded onto the wagon he pointed out at the end of the street, Lucas turned back to her one final time. The Christmas market was closing down around them, other vendors packing up their own goods, and the temperature was dropping as full darkness settled over Empire City. "Mrs. Greenwood," Lucas said, and then paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Would you permit me to ask you a question that may be too forward?" Sarah wrapped her shawl more tightly around herself, equal parts curious and nervous. "You may ask. I cannot promise I will answer." "Fair enough," Lucas acknowledged. He met her eyes directly, no trace of pity or condescension in his gaze. "Do you have a trade beyond making the goods I just purchased? I mean no offense by the question. I am asking because I may have a proposition that could benefit us both." "I was a teacher before I married," Sarah said slowly. "I taught children their letters and numbers in a small school back in Missouri. Since coming to Nevada, I have mostly kept house, but I have helped some of the children in town with their reading when their parents asked." Lucas nodded as though this confirmed something he had been thinking. "My ranch hands, several of them cannot read or write at all. It causes problems when we need to record things, send messages, or handle any kind of paperwork. I have been considering hiring someone to come to the ranch once or twice a week to teach them basic literacy. Would that be something that might interest you?" Sarah's breath caught. "You are offering me employment." "I am offering you a job, yes," Lucas said simply. "I would pay you fairly for your time, and I can arrange for transportation to and from the ranch if you do not have a horse. The lessons could be in the evening after the main work is done. I think 2 or 3 times a week would be sufficient to start. It was too much. Too generous, too perfect, too convenient. Sarah found herself searching his face for signs of ulterior motives, for the catch that surely had to exist. Men did not simply appear out of nowhere and solve all of a woman's problems without expecting something in return. But Lucas Brennan's expression remained open and honest, waiting for her answer without pressure. "Why?" Sarah asked finally. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know me at all." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes drifting to the mountains in the distance before returning to her face. "My mother died when I was 12, he said softly. "After she passed, my father became distant, and my younger brother and I essentially raised ourselves. When I was 16, a neighbor woman, Mrs. Catherine Martinez, took it upon herself to check on us regularly. She was a widow, and she was not young or beautiful by society's standards, and most people in our town ignored her much the way I suspect people ignore you. But she had a good heart and sharp eyes, and she saw that we needed help even though we were too proud to ask for it." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. "She taught me to read properly, helped me understand numbers and contracts, made sure we knew how to care for ourselves. When my father drank himself to death 2 years later, she helped me keep the small ranch we had instead of losing it to creditors. Everything I have now, I built on the foundation she helped me create." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion as she listened. "What happened to her?" "She died 5 years ago," Lucas said, and genuine sadness crossed his face. "She was alone when it happened. Heart failure, the doctor said. I was in Texas buying cattle and did not make it back in time for her funeral. I have regretted that every day since." He looked directly at Sarah again. "So when I see someone like you, someone good and hardworking being ignored and dismissed because of how they look rather than who they are, I think of Mrs. Martinez. And I try to do what I wish more people had done for her." The honesty of it, the raw emotion beneath his controlled exterior, stripped away the last of Sarah's defenses. She realized she was crying again, but this time she did not turn away. "I accept your offer, Mr. Brennan," she said, her voice thick with tears. "And I thank you. You have quite possibly saved my life today, though I suspect you would dismiss that as exaggeration." "I would not dismiss it," Lucas said quietly. "I know how hard this world can be for people without resources or protection. I am glad I was here today, Mrs. Greenwood. Very glad." He glanced up at the darkening sky. "It is getting late and colder. Do you have far to walk to your home?" "The edge of town," Sarah said. "Perhaps a 15-minute walk." "I will drive you in the wagon," Lucas said firmly. "It is too cold and too dark for you to walk alone, and the wagon is already loaded. You can direct me to your home." Sarah started to protest, but Lucas was already walking toward his wagon, clearly expecting her to follow. She found herself smiling slightly despite her tears, charmed by his matter-of-fact kindness. She gathered her empty crates and followed him, climbing up onto the wagon seat with his assistance. His hand was steady and strong as he helped her up, and he did not flinch or hesitate at supporting her weight the way some men might have. The ride through Empire City was quiet, with Sarah giving occasional directions and Lucas handling the horses with practiced ease. The town was beautiful in the evening, with lamplight glowing in windows and the last remnants of the Christmas market creating a festive atmosphere. Sarah tried to memorize the feeling of this moment, sitting beside a kind man who had treated her with respect and dignity, her pocket heavy with money that would keep her afloat for months to come. Whatever happened next, she would have this memory. When they reached her small cabin, Lucas helped her down from the wagon and insisted on carrying her empty crates to her door. He stood there in the cold, his breath misting in the air, and gave her a small nod. "I will send someone into town in 3 days to collect you for the first lesson if that suits you, around 6 in the evening after dinner." "That would be perfect," Sarah said. "Thank you again, Mr. Brennan, for everything." "Lucas," he said. "If we are going to be working together, you should call me Lucas." "Then you must call me Sarah," she replied, managing a genuine smile for the first time in longer than she could remember. Lucas smiled back, that warm expression that transformed his whole face. "Sarah it is. I will see you in 3 days. Stay warm." He tipped his hat to her and walked back to his wagon, climbing up with easy grace despite his size. Sarah stood in her doorway and watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing into the darkness, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not love, not yet, too new and fragile for such a name. But it was hope, genuine and bright, and that was something she had not felt in such a very long time. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Sarah used some of the money Lucas had given her to pay her rent, then spent hours planning lessons for the ranch hands. She dug out her old teaching materials, carefully preserved from her time in Missouri, and created simple exercises that would work for adult learners with varying levels of ability. She also used some of her remaining flour and sugar to bake bread and cookies, unable to shake the feeling that she should bring something to her first lesson as a gesture of goodwill. When the day finally arrived, Sarah found herself more nervous than she had expected. She changed her dress 3 times, trying to find something that looked professional but not too formal, practical but not shabby. She settled finally on her dark blue wool dress, the one that was least worn and most flattering to her figure despite her size. She braided her brown hair carefully and pinned it in a neat coil at the base of her neck, then studied her reflection in her small mirror with a critical eye. She was 34 years old, and she looked it. Her face was round and soft, marked by the weight she carried and the hardships she had endured. Her eyes were her best feature, dark brown and expressive, but they were surrounded by lines of worry and grief. She would never be beautiful, had never been beautiful even in her youth. But looking at herself now, dressed carefully and with purpose in her eyes, she thought perhaps she looked respectable, dignified. That would have to be enough. The knock on her door came precisely at 6, and Sarah opened it to find a young man of perhaps 20 standing on her step, hat in hand. "Mrs. Greenwood, I am James, one of Mr. Brennan's hands. He sent me to collect you for the lesson." "Thank you, James," Sarah said warmly, gathering her teaching materials and the basket of baked goods. "I am ready." The ride to the ranch took nearly 40 minutes, following a well-maintained road that wound through the scrubby Nevada landscape. James was quiet but polite, answering her questions about the ranch and the other hands with brief but informative responses. Sarah learned that Lucas employed 9 men total, ranging in age from 19 to 56, and that the ranch ran about 2,000 head of cattle across several thousand acres of grazing land. It was a significant operation, and the fact that Lucas owned and managed it all spoke to his competence and work ethic. The ranch itself was larger and more prosperous-looking than Sarah had expected. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built from good timber, with a wide porch and multiple windows that glowed with lamplight. Surrounding it were various outbuildings including a large barn, several storage sheds, a bunkhouse, and what looked like a separate cottage. Fences marked off corrals and pastures, and in the distance, Sarah could see the dark shapes of cattle grazing in the twilight. Lucas emerged from the main house as James pulled the wagon to a stop, and Sarah felt her breath catch slightly at the sight of him. He had changed from the fine clothes he wore in town to more practical ranch wear, denim trousers and a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up despite the cold. But somehow he looked even more impressive this way. More real, more solid, more himself. "Sarah," he said, coming forward to help her down from the wagon. "Welcome to the Brennan Ranch. I hope the journey was not too uncomfortable." "Not at all," Sarah assured him, accepting his help and trying not to notice how easily he lifted her down despite her weight. James was an excellent driver and good company. Lucas smiled at the young man who was already driving the wagon toward the barn. "James is one of my best hands, quiet but reliable," he gestured toward the barn. "I thought we could hold the lessons in the tack room. It has a stove to keep warm, a large table we can work at, and enough space for everyone to sit comfortably. Would you like to see it before the men arrive?" "Yes, thank you," Sarah said, following him across the yard. She was acutely aware of his presence beside her. The way he adjusted his longer stride to match her shorter one. The courteous way he gestured and explained things as they walked. It had been so long since a man treated her with this kind of casual respect that she found herself almost dizzy with the novelty of it. The tack room was exactly as he described, a large space that smelled of leather and oil, with a pot-belly stove radiating heat and a massive wooden table in the center surrounded by chairs and benches. Someone had already set out paper, pencils, and several slates, clearly in preparation for the lesson. Sarah set down her materials and looked around with approval. "This will work perfectly. You have clearly thought this through." "I wanted you to have everything you might need," Lucas said. He seemed slightly nervous, she realized with surprise, his hands resting on his belt in a way that suggested he was not entirely comfortable. "I should probably mention that some of the men are skeptical about this whole endeavor, not about you specifically, but about learning in general. They may be resistant at first. I taught in a one-room schoolhouse with 30 children of all ages," Sarah said with a confidence she had not felt in years. "I think I can handle skeptical ranch hands, though I appreciate the warning." Lucas's expression relaxed into a smile. "I believe you can. I will stay for the first lesson if you do not mind, just to make sure everyone behaves themselves and to show my support for this undertaking." Over the next few minutes, the ranch hands began to filter into the tack room, most looking uncomfortable and uncertain. Sarah greeted each one warmly, making note of their names and trying to get a sense of their personalities. There was Diego, a Mexican man in his 40s with work-roughened hands and kind eyes. Frank, the oldest at 56, grizzled and weathered like old leather. Young James, who had driven her here, along with his brother Thomas, who was a year younger. William, Robert, Henry, Charles, and Samuel, ranging from mid-20s to early 40s, all watching her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. When everyone was seated, Sarah stood at the head of the table and took a moment to study the faces looking back at her. She saw intelligence there, and pride, and more than a little defensiveness. These were men who worked hard and lived hard, and admitting they could not read or write was likely a source of shame for them. She would need to handle this carefully. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said clearly, pitching her voice to carry without shouting. "My name is Sarah Greenwood, and Mr. Brennan has hired me to teach you reading and writing. Before we begin, I want to make something very clear. There is no shame in not knowing these skills. Many good, intelligent people have never had the opportunity to learn, and that is a failing of circumstance, not character. What matters is that you are here now, willing to learn, and I promise you that I will do my best to make this worthwhile for you." She saw some of the tension leave their shoulders, saw Diego nod slowly in agreement. Encouraged, she continued. "We will start with the basics, learning letters and sounds, but we will move as quickly or slowly as the group needs. My goal is for all of you to be able to read a simple letter and write your own name within a month. Beyond that, we will see how far we can go together. Now, who can already write their name? 3 hands went up hesitantly. James, Thomas, and Samuel. Sarah nodded, making mental notes. Excellent. That gives us a starting point. For those of you who cannot yet write your name, that will be your first goal. By the end of tonight's lesson, each of you will be able to write at least 1 letter. Let us begin. The next 2 hours passed quickly, with Sarah falling back into the rhythms of teaching as though she had never stopped. She worked her way around the table, helping each man individually while giving the others exercises to practice. She praised effort over results, corrected gently, and made sure to acknowledge every small success. Lucas watched from the corner of the room, his expression unreadable but his attention focused entirely on the lesson. By the end of the evening, every man in the room could write at least 3 letters, and several could write their full first names. The mood had shifted from skeptical to engaged, and Sarah could see the satisfaction on their faces as they looked at their work. Even grizzled old Frank, who had been the most resistant at the start, was carefully practicing the letters of his name with fierce concentration. As the men filed out, several thanked her quietly, and Diego clasped her hand between his own work-roughened ones. "You are a good teacher, Mrs. Greenwood, patient but clear. I look forward to the next lesson." "As do I, Diego," Sarah said warmly. "You did excellent work tonight." When the last man had left, Sarah began gathering her materials, feeling tired but satisfied. This was what she had been missing, she realized: purpose. The sense of being useful and appreciated. She had not realized how much of herself she had lost in grief and isolation until this moment, feeling it return. "You were magnificent," Lucas said quietly from behind her, making her jump slightly. She had almost forgotten he was still there. He stepped closer, his eyes warm with admiration. "I have never seen anyone handle that group so skillfully. You had them eating out of your hand within 20 minutes. Sarah felt herself flush with pleasure at the praise. "They are good men, intelligent and motivated. They just needed someone to show them that learning was possible." "They needed you," Lucas corrected gently. He helped her pack up her materials, their hands brushing occasionally in a way that made Sarah's heart beat faster. "Sarah, I know we agreed on twice a week, but after seeing tonight, I wonder if you would consider 3 times a week. I will pay you proportionally more, of course. I think with 3 sessions, you could have them all reading simple texts within 2 months." "3 times a week would be wonderful," Sarah said, trying to keep the eagerness out of her voice. 3 times a week meant more income, yes, but it also meant seeing Lucas 3 times a week, being part of this community, having purpose and structure to her days. "I think you are right about the timeline. These men are quick learners." Lucas smiled, that warm expression she was beginning to treasure. "Then it is settled. James will collect you Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings at 6. He paused, seeming to consider something. "Sarah, I hope this is not too forward, but would you join me for dinner before you head back to town? It is late, and you must be hungry after all that teaching." Sarah's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain proper boundaries and protect herself from hoping for too much. But looking at Lucas's face, at the genuine welcome she saw there, she found herself nodding. "I would like that very much." Lucas's smile widened and he offered her his arm. "Then allow me to escort you to the house. I am afraid my cooking is nothing special, but I can promise it is hot and filling." Sarah took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her hand, and let him lead her from the tack room toward the main house. The night was cold and clear, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. and the windows of the ranch house glowed with warm light that seemed impossibly welcoming. Sarah felt something flutter in her chest, something that felt dangerously like happiness. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment without questioning whether she deserved it. The interior of the main house was clean and well-maintained, furnished simply but comfortably. Lucas led her to a dining room dominated by a large wooden table, then excused himself to the kitchen. He returned minutes later with 2 plates of stew, thick with beef and vegetables, along with fresh bread and butter. "You cooked this yourself?" Sarah asked, surprised by how good it looked and smelled. "I did," Lucas confirmed, settling into the chair across from her. "When you live alone, you learn to cook or you starve. I am no master chef, but I can make basic meals well enough." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Sarah savoring the rich flavors of the stew. It had been a long time since she had eaten a meal she had not prepared herself, and longer still since she had shared dinner with a man. The intimacy of it, just the two of them in this warm room while darkness pressed against the windows, felt both foreign and deeply right. "May I ask you something personal?" Lucas said eventually, setting down his spoon and looking at her directly. Sarah's stomach tightened with nervousness, but she nodded. "You may ask. At the Christmas market, you said you had been widowed for 2 years. Have you been alone all that time? No family or close friends to help you?" Sarah set down her own spoon, choosing her words carefully. "My parents died when I was young. I have a sister, but she moved to California with her husband 5 years ago, and we have not maintained regular correspondence. As for friends..." She paused, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness. "When Thomas died, many of the people I thought were friends proved to be merely acquaintances. They came to the funeral, brought a few casseroles, and then disappeared from my life. I think my grief made them uncomfortable, or perhaps my circumstances. It is hard to maintain friendships when you cannot afford to reciprocate hospitality or keep up with social expectations." Lucas's expression darkened with what looked like anger, though again not directed at her. "This town failed you. They should have done better." "Perhaps," Sarah said, "but I survived, and that is what matters. And now, thanks to you, I am not merely surviving anymore. I am beginning to live again." She met his eyes across the table. "May I ask you something equally personal in return?" "Of course. Why do you live alone in this large house? I notice there is no indication of a woman's presence, no wife or mother or housekeeper. For a man of your obvious success and character, that seems unusual." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "I was engaged once, about 6 years ago. Her name was Rebecca, and she was the daughter of a banker in Virginia City. Beautiful, refined, educated. We courted for 8 months, and I thought I loved her. I proposed, she accepted, and we began planning a wedding." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Then she visited the ranch for the first time. Not this house, this is newer, but the original homestead that stood here before. It was rougher then, more primitive, and the work was harder. Rebecca lasted 3 days before she told me she could not possibly live in such conditions. She wanted me to sell the ranch, move to Virginia City, find work that was more genteel and less dirty. When I refused, she ended the engagement." Sarah felt a surge of irrational anger toward this unknown Rebecca. "She did not deserve you." Lucas looked up, surprise flickering across his face, followed by something warmer. "That is kind of you to say. At the time, I was devastated. I thought I would never find anyone who could accept my life as it was. Eventually, I decided I was better off alone, focusing on building the ranch into something successful. I threw myself into work, expanded the herds, built this house, and told myself I was content." He met Sarah's eyes directly. But lately, I have been questioning that contentment, wondering if I settled for less than I could have because I was afraid of being rejected again. The honesty of it, the vulnerability beneath his strong exterior, made Sarah's heart ache with sympathy and something deeper. "I understand that feeling," she said softly. "After Thomas died, I told myself I was better off alone too. That no man would want a woman like me anyway, so there was no point in hoping for anything different. I think we both convinced ourselves that loneliness was preferable to the risk of rejection. And now?" Lucas asked, his voice low and intense. "Now I am not so certain," Sarah admitted, her pulse racing. "Now I think perhaps I gave up too easily, accepted too little, let fear guide me instead of courage." Lucas stood slowly, moving around the table until he stood beside her chair. He held out his hand, palm up, an invitation rather than a demand. "Sarah Greenwood, would you walk with me for a few minutes? I would like to show you something." Sarah placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip, and let him help her to her feet. He led her through the house to a door that opened onto the back porch, then down steps into a garden area. Even in December, even in Nevada's harsh climate, someone had clearly been tending this space. There were winter vegetables growing in neat rows, protected by cold frames and evergreen shrubs that provided structure and greenery even in the dead of winter. "I started this garden 3 years ago," Lucas said, walking slowly along the paths with Sarah's hand still clasped in his. "I told myself it was practical, that growing our own vegetables would save money. But the truth is, I needed something living to care for, something that would grow and change and require my attention. I was so lonely I could hardly stand it, but I was too proud and too afraid to do anything about it, so I planted a garden instead." He stopped walking and turned to face her, both of her hands now clasped in his. The moonlight caught his face, highlighting the strong bones and the vulnerability in his eyes. "When I saw you at that Christmas market, being ignored and dismissed by people who could not see past your appearance to the person beneath, I felt like I was looking at a mirror of my own isolation. But I also saw something else. I saw strength and dignity and creativity and kindness. I saw someone who had survived hardship without becoming bitter or cruel. And I knew in that moment that I wanted to know you better, that I wanted to be part of your life if you would allow it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. "Lucas, I do not know what to say. I have spent so long thinking of myself as invisible, unworthy of notice, that I cannot quite believe this is happening." "Believe it," Lucas said firmly. He raised one hand to gently cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. "You are not invisible to me, Sarah. You are vital and real and more beautiful than you know. Not because of how you look, though I find you attractive in ways that have nothing to do with conventional beauty, but because of who you are. Because of your strength and your kindness and the way you treated my ranch hands tonight with respect and patience. Because of the way you have survived and kept going when many others would have given up." "I do not feel strong," Sarah whispered. "Then let me be strong enough for both of us until you remember your own strength," Lucas said. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and pressed his lips gently against her forehead. The kiss was chaste and tender, nothing improper, but it sent warmth flooding through Sarah's entire body. She swayed toward him, and his arms came around her, holding her carefully against his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms under the Nevada stars, and Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her. This was not the love she had known with Thomas, comfortable and safe but ultimately passionless. This was something different, something fierce and bright that both terrified and exhilarated her. She was falling in love with Lucas Brennan, falling fast and hard. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved that kind of happiness. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that Sarah came to treasure more than she would have thought possible. 3 times a week, James collected her from her cabin and drove her to the ranch, where she taught the evening lessons to increasingly engaged and capable students. The ranch hands progressed rapidly, motivated by both Sarah's excellent teaching and Lucas's clear support of their education. Within a month, all 9 men could write their names and read simple sentences. Within 2 months, most could read from basic primers and write short notes. But as important as the teaching was to Sarah, it was the time after the lessons that she valued most. Each evening, after the men returned to the bunkhouse, Lucas would invite her to stay for dinner. They would eat together in the warm dining room, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas told her stories about building the ranch, about his travels buying cattle, about the challenges of managing land and livestock in Nevada's unforgiving climate. Sarah shared memories of her teaching days, her childhood in Missouri, her dreams of things she had wanted to do before life and circumstance narrowed her options. They argued sometimes, passionately but respectfully, about books they had both read, about politics and social issues, about the best way to train a horse or cook a roast. Lucas had a sharp mind and strong opinions, but he listened to Sarah's perspectives with genuine attention, and often changed his views when she made compelling arguments. Sarah found herself looking forward to these debates as much as their more peaceful conversations, thrilled to finally have someone who engaged with her thoughts as though they mattered. Slowly, carefully, they began to court in earnest. Lucas started finding excuses to visit Empire City more frequently, always stopping by Sarah's cabin with small gifts, a book he thought she would enjoy, fresh fruit from his trees, a new shawl in a beautiful deep red that made her eyes sparkle. Sarah reciprocated as best she could with her more limited means, baking him his favorite foods, mending his shirts when she noticed they needed repair, creating a beautiful bookmark embroidered with his initials. By March, when the worst of winter was behind them and spring was beginning to show itself in small green shoots, Lucas took Sarah's hand as they walked through his garden and asked her a question that changed everything. "Sarah, I know we have not been courting for very long by conventional standards, but I am a man who knows his own mind, and I know what I want. What I want is you, in every way a man can want a woman. I want you in my home, in my life, in my bed. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership based on mutual respect and genuine love." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes intense with emotion. "I am asking you to marry me, Sarah Greenwood. Will you be my wife?" Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Everything she had thought impossible just 4 months ago was being offered to her in this moment, by this extraordinary man who saw her in ways no one else ever had. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Lucas. I will marry you. I love you and I want to spend my life with you." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, and Sarah felt him trembling slightly with emotion. "I love you too," he said against her hair. "So much more than I thought possible. You have brought light back into my life, Sarah. Joy and purpose and hope. I will spend the rest of my days trying to give you the same." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, then lowered his head and kissed her properly for the first time. It was not a chaste kiss on the forehead or cheek, but a real kiss, deep and passionate and full of promise. Sarah kissed him back with all the love and longing she had been holding back, pouring months of growing affection into this one perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers and laughed quietly. "I should have done that weeks ago," he said. "Yes, you should have," Sarah agreed, smiling so widely her face hurt. "But it was worth the wait." They were married 6 weeks later, in late April, when the desert was blooming with unexpected wildflowers. The ceremony was small, held at the ranch with only the hands and a few of Lucas's neighbors in attendance. Sarah wore a new dress in pale blue that Lucas had insisted on buying for her, and she carried wildflowers picked that morning from the hills surrounding the ranch. Lucas wore his finest suit, his hair neatly combed and his eyes shining with happiness as he spoke his vows. The local minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Lucas kissed Sarah with such tenderness and joy that several of the watching men cheered. There was a celebration after, with food and music and dancing, and Sarah found herself laughing more than she could remember laughing in years. The ranch hands toasted them, several making jokes at Lucas's expense that he took with good humor. Diego gave a short speech in Spanish that Thomas translated, wishing them love and prosperity and many children. As the sun set and the party wound down, Lucas took Sarah's hand and led her into the main house, up the stairs to the bedroom that would now be theirs together. He had clearly prepared for this moment, with fresh flowers on the dresser and new curtains on the windows and the bed made up with beautiful linens. "I know you must be nervous," Lucas said softly, closing the door behind them for privacy. "I am nervous too, if I am honest. But I want you to know that we can take this as slowly as you need. There is no rush, no pressure. We have the rest of our lives." Sarah turned to face him, feeling her own nervousness but also excitement and love so powerful it almost overwhelmed her. "I am nervous," she admitted. "Thomas and we had a cordial marriage but not a passionate one. I am not experienced in the ways that matter. But I trust you, Lucas. I love you, and I want this. I want you." Lucas crossed the room in 2 long strides and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a hunger that had been building for months. Sarah kissed him back just as hungrily, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders, then into his hair. He was gentle but not tentative, passionate but not rough, taking his time to learn what pleased her and adjusting his touches accordingly. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness and completion that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Afterward, lying wrapped in Lucas's arms with her head on his chest, Sarah felt more content than she had ever been. This was what she had been missing, she realized. Not just physical intimacy, though that had been wonderful and revelatory, but this sense of complete acceptance and belonging. Lucas loved her not despite who she was, but because of it. He saw all of her, the flaws and fears and imperfections, and he chose her anyway. He treasured her. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman alive," Sarah said honestly. "I am thinking that 4 months ago I was standing at a Christmas market believing my life was over, and now I am lying in bed with my husband feeling like my life is just beginning." Lucas tightened his arms around her. "I am the lucky one. I was convinced I would spend my life alone, and then you appeared and changed everything. You saved me, Sarah, from loneliness and bitterness and my own stubborn pride. You made me remember how to hope." "Then we saved each other," Sarah said, tilting her head up to kiss him softly. "And we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." The months that followed their wedding were some of the happiest of Sarah's life. She moved into the ranch house, bringing her few possessions and immediately setting about making the space feel more like a home. She added curtains and rugs, rearranged furniture to be more welcoming, planted flowers in the garden. Lucas encouraged all of it, clearly delighted to have someone caring for his home in ways he had never managed alone. Sarah continued teaching the ranch hands 3 times a week and was gratified to see their continued progress. By summer, all 9 men could read newspapers and write letters home to family. Several began carrying books with them during breaks, reading for pleasure in their free time. Diego was particularly enthusiastic, working his way through every book in Lucas's small library and asking Sarah for recommendations for more. But Sarah's favorite part of her new life was simply being married to Lucas. They fell into rhythms and routines that felt natural and right, learning each other's habits and preferences, supporting each other through the daily challenges of ranch life. Lucas consulted her on business decisions, valuing her intelligence and different perspective. Sarah helped with the ranch bookkeeping, discovering a talent for numbers she had not fully explored before. They were partners in every sense of the word, and the respect and affection between them only deepened as time passed. In October, 6 months after their wedding, Sarah realized she had missed her monthly courses for the second time. She waited another week to be certain, then chose a quiet evening when they were alone together to share her news. "Lucas," she said carefully, setting down her embroidery and looking at where he sat reading in his chair by the fire. "I have something to tell you." He looked up immediately, his expression becoming concerned at her serious tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine," Sarah assured him quickly. "Better than fine, actually. I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment Lucas just stared at her, his expression frozen in shock. Then a smile spread across his face, wide and joyful and so full of love that Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. He set his book aside and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair and taking both her hands in his. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Sarah, that is the most wonderful news I could imagine. Are you happy about this?" "I am terrified and thrilled in equal measure," Sarah admitted. "I am 35 years old, Lucas, not young for a first pregnancy. There are risks and I am worried about them. But yes, I am happy, so very happy." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "We will get you the best doctor, everything you need. I will take care of you, I promise, both of you." He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You have given me so much, Sarah. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I do not have words for how blessed I feel." "Then show me instead," Sarah said softly, and Lucas did, carrying her upstairs and making love to her with such tender reverence that she cried from the sheer emotion of it. The pregnancy progressed well, much to everyone's relief. Lucas brought in the best doctor from Virginia City, a stern but competent man named Dr. Harrison, who examined Sarah thoroughly and pronounced her healthy and strong despite her age. Sarah continued teaching through the fall and early winter, only stopping when she became too large and tired to make the journey to the tack room comfortably. The ranch hands were universally excited about the coming baby, several of them whittling toys or making small gifts for the child. Diego, who had children and grandchildren of his own back in Mexico, appointed himself Sarah's unofficial guardian, constantly checking on her and bringing her herbal teas his mother had sworn by during her pregnancies. Even gruff old Frank went soft, volunteering to help with any task that might be too strenuous for Sarah in her condition. Lucas was simultaneously excited and terrified, reading every book on pregnancy and childbirth he could find, asking Dr. Harrison endless questions, preparing the bedroom across from theirs to serve as a nursery. He painted it a cheerful yellow, built a beautiful cradle from scratch, and filled it with toys and blankets. He was attentive to Sarah's every need, sometimes to the point where she had to gently remind him that she was pregnant, not made of glass. In April, Almost exactly 1 year after their wedding, Sarah went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Lucas was certain he would lose either Sarah or the baby or both. He paced outside the bedroom door while Dr. Harrison worked, praying more fervently than he ever had in his life, bargaining with God to save his wife even if it meant losing the child. But Sarah was stronger than even she knew. She fought through the pain and exhaustion, drawing on reserves of strength she had built over years of hardship and survival. And finally, as dawn was breaking over the desert, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy with powerful lungs and Lucas's blue-green eyes. When Dr. Harrison finally allowed Lucas into the room, he found Sarah propped up on pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding their son against her chest. She looked up at Lucas with such love and pride that he could barely see her through his tears. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Lucas approached slowly, almost afraid to believe this was real. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect. Sarah, I am so proud of you, so grateful to you." "His name is Thomas," Sarah said, and Lucas looked up at her in surprise. "After my first husband. He was a good man, Lucas, even if we were not passionately in love. He deserves to be remembered, and this seemed like a fitting way to honor him, if you do not mind." Lucas felt his throat tighten with emotion at her generosity of spirit. "I do not mind at all. Thomas Brennan. It is a good, strong name." He reached out one finger, and tiny Thomas immediately grasped it with surprisingly strong baby fingers. "Hello, son. Welcome to the world." The months following Thomas's birth were exhausting but joyful. Sarah had never imagined she would be a mother, had given up on that dream when Thomas Greenwood died without giving her children. But now she had this tiny perfect person who depended on her completely, and she discovered reserves of patience and love she had not known she possessed. Lucas was a devoted father, rising with Sarah for nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at his existence. The ranch hands doted on Thomas as though he were a nephew or grandson, taking turns entertaining him when Sarah needed a break, teaching him silly songs and games as he grew old enough to respond. When Thomas was 6 months old, Sarah resumed her teaching on a limited basis, bringing the baby with her to lessons and letting the ranch hands take turns holding him while she worked. It created a warm, family atmosphere that everyone seemed to appreciate, and little Thomas grew up surrounded by love and attention from multiple sources. 2 years after Thomas was born, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because her body knew what to expect. And in March of 1866, she gave birth to a healthy daughter they named Catherine, after the widow who had helped Lucas as a boy. Catherine had Sarah's brown eyes and dark hair, and from the moment she was born she was a force of nature, loud and demanding and full of energy. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Lucas expanded his operation, buying more land and increasing his herds. Sarah managed the household and continued teaching, though now she also taught the ranch hands children who came to the ranch periodically. The one-room schoolhouse approach of her youth proved valuable, and she discovered she loved teaching students of mixed ages and abilities. Thomas and Catherine grew up healthy and happy, running wild on the ranch under the watchful eyes of their parents and the hands. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful like his father, fascinated by the cattle and horses, always asking questions about how things worked. Catherine was bold and fearless, climbing everything she could reach, demanding stories and attention, charming everyone she met. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Sarah and Lucas took a rare evening alone together, sitting on the back porch and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "Do you ever think about that Christmas market?" Lucas asked, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "About how different our lives might have been if I had not walked past your stall that day." "I try not to think about it too much," Sarah admitted. "It frightens me, how close I came to giving up entirely. If you had not bought my goods, if you had not given me that job, I am not certain I would have survived the winter. Not physically, perhaps, but emotionally. I was so lost, Lucas, so convinced I had nothing left to offer the world." "The world's loss would have been incalculable," Lucas said firmly. "But it would have been my loss most of all. You are everything to me, Sarah. My partner, my love, the mother of my children, my best friend. I was half alive before I met you, just going through motions. You taught me how to really live again." Sarah turned to look at her husband, this good and decent man who had seen her when she was invisible to everyone else. His face was more lined now than it had been 5 years ago, marked by time and hard work and the responsibilities of family life. But he was still the most handsome man she had ever known, still the kindest, still the one she loved more than anyone else in the world besides their children. "I love you," she said simply. "More every day, which I did not think was possible. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, Lucas. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. And you gave me this life, this beautiful life I could never have imagined for myself." Lucas kissed her softly, tasting of coffee and contentment. "We saved each other. And we built this together, all of it. The ranch, the family, the love. That is what I am most proud of, Sarah. Not the land or the cattle or the money, but this. Us. What we have created together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their children playing, Diego's voice as he told them some story, the warm domestic sounds of a home full of life and love. It was everything Sarah had ever wanted and more than she had dared to dream possible. 10 years after their wedding, in the spring of 1873, Sarah stood in her garden planting seeds for the summer vegetables. She was 45 years old now, her body marked by time and childbearing and hard work. She would never be slim or conventionally beautiful, would never turn heads when she walked down the street. But she was content in her own skin in a way she had never been before, comfortable with who she was and what her life had become. Thomas was now 12, tall for his age and already showing signs of the man he would become. He worked alongside his father on the ranch, learning the business with serious dedication. Catherine was 10, still wild and energetic, but showing a sharp mind and strong will that suggested she would do impressive things with her life. Sarah taught them both daily, giving them the education she had valued so highly, watching with pride as they surpassed her expectations again and again. The ranch had prospered beyond even Lucas's ambitious goals. They now ran over 5,000 head of cattle and employed 20 men year-round. The original 9 ranch hands were still with them, though some had married and moved into their own cabins on the property. Diego was now foreman, respected by all the other hands and treated like family by Lucas and Sarah. Several of the men had learned to read so well that they helped teach newer hands, creating a culture of literacy and learning that made the Brennan Ranch somewhat unusual in the territory. Sarah had also quietly begun a small school in Empire City, teaching children whose families could not afford the established schools or who were excluded for various reasons. She charged no fees, supporting the school with money from the ranch and donations from families who could afford to give. It gave her immense satisfaction. This ability to help children the way she had once needed help, to see them grow and learn and discover their own potential. Lucas came up behind her in the garden, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked. "I am thinking about how much has changed," Sarah said, leaning back against him. "How different my life is now from what I thought it would be. 10 years ago today, we spoke our vows and promised to build a life together. I do not think I really understood then what that would mean, how much joy and purpose and love we would create." "Are you happy?" Lucas asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice, a need to know that she was as content as he hoped. "I am more than happy," Sarah said, turning in his arms to face him. "I am fulfilled. I wake up every morning grateful for this life, for you, for our children, for everything we have built together. You took a woman who felt invisible and worthless and gave her a reason to be proud of herself. You showed me that I had value beyond what society said I should be. You loved me when I had forgotten how to love myself." Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his eyes serious and intense. "You did the same for me. I was existing, not living, before you came into my life. You gave me purpose beyond just building wealth. You taught me about real partnership, about love that goes deeper than surface attraction. You are my heart, Sarah, the best part of me. Everything good in my life exists because you are in it." They kissed there in the garden, surrounded by growing things and the promise of new life, and Sarah felt the same rush of love and desire she had felt on their wedding night. It had not faded with time, had not been diminished by familiarity or the challenges of daily life. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect and the daily choice to keep choosing each other. That evening, after the children were in bed and the ranch had settled into quiet, Sarah and Lucas sat together in their bedroom. Lucas had given her a gift for their anniversary, a beautiful journal bound in leather with her initials embossed in gold. "For your thoughts," he said, "for recording this life we have built. I know you keep notes for your teaching, but this is for you. For memories and reflections and anything else you want to preserve." Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you. This is perfect." She opened to the first page and found Lucas had already written something there in his neat, careful hand. She read it aloud, her voice catching with emotion. "To my beloved Sarah. 10 years ago you stood with me and promised to share your life with me, and you have kept that promise every single day since. You have given me love, children, purpose, and joy beyond measure. This journal is for you to record our story, so that someday our grandchildren will know how their grandparents met and fell in love. So they will know that true love can happen in unexpected places, between unlikely people, and that it can change everything. I love you more than words can express today and always. Your devoted husband, Lucas." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she finished reading. She set the journal aside carefully and moved to sit in Lucas's lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "So much. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for choosing me when you could have had anyone." "I could not have had anyone," Lucas corrected gently. "I could only ever have had you. You were exactly who I needed, exactly when I needed you." It was never about settling or accepting less. It was about finding the one person in the world who fit perfectly with me. And I found her standing behind a stall at a Christmas market, creating beauty that no one else had the sense to appreciate. They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of long familiarity, knowing exactly how to please each other, drawing out pleasure until they were both breathless and satisfied. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Sarah felt completely at peace. This was what love was supposed to be, she thought. Not just passion or romance, though they had that, but partnership and respect, and the daily choice to support and cherish each other through everything life brought. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and growth and the slow accumulation of shared memories. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch management as Lucas began to slow down. At 21, he married a schoolteacher from Virginia City named Margaret, a smart and capable woman who reminded Sarah so much of her younger self that she could not help but love her immediately. Catherine proved to be brilliant, eventually leaving the ranch to attend a women's college in California, one of the few institutions that would accept female students. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of ideas and ambitions that both impressed and slightly frightened her parents. Sarah and Lucas became grandparents when Thomas and Margaret had their first child, a girl named Sarah Catherine after both grandmothers. The experience of holding her granddaughter for the first time, seeing her own features reflected in this tiny new person, moved Sarah to tears. It felt like validation somehow, proof that she had left a mark on the world that would continue beyond her own life. They had more grandchildren over the years. Thomas and Margaret had 4 children total, 2 girls and 2 boys. Catherine eventually married a professor she met at college and had 3 children of her own, visiting the ranch as often as her busy life in California allowed. The ranch house that had once felt too large for just Lucas became filled with noise and life, and the chaos of multiple generations living and visiting. Sarah continued her school in Empire City into her 60s, finally retiring when her joints became too painful to make the journey comfortably. But she still taught privately, working with students who came to the ranch seeking her help. Her reputation as an excellent teacher had spread over the years, and families would travel significant distances to have her work with their children. She never charged much, remembering her own struggles and wanting to make education accessible to anyone who wanted it. Lucas remained active in the ranch management well into his 70s, though he increasingly let Thomas handle the day-to-day operations. He and Sarah spent more time together, taking long walks through the property they had built together, sitting on their porch and watching sunsets, reading together in comfortable silence. They were grandparents, elders, the foundation on which their family was built. On a warm evening in June of 1888, 25 years after their wedding, Sarah and Lucas sat on their porch and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. Sarah was 68 now, Lucas 71. Their bodies were marked by age and hard use, but their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. "You remember what you told me that first night in the garden?" Sarah asked, her hand clasped in Lucas's. "You said you needed something living to care for. That you had planted a garden because you were so lonely." "I remember," Lucas said. "I think about that often, actually, about how lost I was before you came into my life." "I was thinking," Sarah continued, "that you did not just plant a garden that year. You planted seeds of a different kind when you bought my goods at the Christmas market. Seeds of hope and possibility. And look what grew from those seeds. This family, this life, all of it started because you chose to see me when everyone else looked away." Lucas lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "It was the best decision I ever made, the best investment. Not because of what it brought me, though it brought me everything, but because it was simply the right thing to do. You deserve to be seen, Sarah. You deserve to be valued and loved and appreciated. I am just grateful I was the one who got to do those things." "We were both invisible before we found each other," Sarah said. "Both so lonely we could barely function, but together we became visible. We became real. We created something that mattered." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in the brilliant colors of a desert evening. Their grandchildren's laughter drifted across the yard, mixed with the sounds of ranch life continuing around them. This was their legacy, Sarah thought. Not just the land or the wealth, but this family, this love, this proof that two lonely people could find each other and build something beautiful. "I have no regrets," Sarah said suddenly. "Not about anything. Every hard thing I endured, every moment of suffering or loneliness or fear, all of it led me to you, to this life. And I would go through it all again if I knew this was where I would end up." "As would I," Lucas agreed. "Every wrong turn, every mistake, every moment of doubt, all of it was worth it because it brought me to that Christmas market on that December evening. It brought me to you." Sarah leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. They had built a good life together, she and this man who had seen her when she was invisible. They had created a family, a legacy, a love that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness. A cowboy buying unsold goods from an ignored widow, recognizing the worth in someone the world had dismissed. As darkness settled over the ranch and stars began to emerge in the vast Nevada sky, Sarah closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For Lucas, for their children and grandchildren, for the years they had shared and the years still to come. For the life she had thought impossible that had somehow, miraculously, become real. "I love you," she whispered and felt Lucas's arms tighten around her. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will, until the end of my days and beyond." And in that moment, sitting on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had shared, Sarah Brennan felt completely and utterly content. She had been invisible once, overlooked and dismissed, standing behind a market stall with her unsold goods and her breaking heart. But Lucas had seen her, had chosen her, had loved her, and that had made all the difference in the world. The years continued their steady march forward. Sarah and Lucas watched their grandchildren grow, attended more weddings, welcomed great-grandchildren into their expanding family. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's capable management, growing and evolving with the changing times while maintaining the core values Lucas had established. The culture of literacy and learning Sarah had fostered remained strong, with the ranch gaining a reputation as a good place to work, not just because of fair wages, but because of the opportunities for education and advancement. Sarah's little school in Empire City continued even after her retirement, run by one of her former students who had gone on to become a certified teacher. It was named the Greenwood Brennan School in honor of both of Sarah's married names, and it served children from families who might otherwise have no access to education. Lucas quietly funded the school's operation, ensuring it would continue long after they were gone. In the spring of 1893, as Sarah approached her 73rd birthday, she began to feel her body failing in ways that could not be ignored or explained away. The doctor confirmed what she had already suspected. Her heart was weakening, worn out by years of hard use. He gave her perhaps 6 months, maybe a year if she was lucky and careful. Sarah chose not to be careful. She had lived a full life, had experienced more love and joy than she ever thought possible, and she was not afraid of death. Instead, she focused on making sure her family knew how much she loved them, on spending quality time with Lucas and her children and grandchildren, on completing the journal Lucas had given her so many years ago so that future generations would know their story. She wrote the final entry on a warm June evening, sitting on the porch with Lucas beside her. Her handwriting was shakier than it had once been, but the words flowed clearly. To whoever reads this in the future, this is the story of how an invisible widow and a lonely cowboy found each other and built a life together. It is the story of how a simple act of kindness at a Christmas market changed everything. Lucas saw me when I was invisible to the world. He valued me when I felt worthless. He loved me when I had forgotten how to love myself. And together, we created something beautiful. A family, a legacy, a love that endured through all challenges. Remember this. True worth is not determined by appearance or social status or what the world says you should be. True worth comes from character, from kindness, from the courage to keep going when everything seems hopeless. And true love can be found in the most unexpected places, between the most unlikely people, when hearts are open to seeing it. I have lived a blessed life, full of more joy than I ever thought possible. And it all began with a cowboy buying my unsold goods and seeing the person behind the invisible widow. May you all be so blessed to find someone who sees you truly, who loves you completely, who chooses you every single day. With love and gratitude for this beautiful life, Sarah Greenwood Brennan. She showed the entry to Lucas, who read it with tears streaming down his weathered face. "That is beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Perfect. Thank you for recording our story, Sarah, for making sure it will not be forgotten." "How could it be forgotten?" Sarah said gently. "It is written in our children, in our grandchildren, in the lives we have touched and the legacy we have built. The journal is just words. The real story lives on in them." Sarah passed away peacefully 2 months later, on a warm August evening with Lucas holding her hand and her family gathered around her bed. Her last words were, "I love you," directed at Lucas, and her last expression was a smile of complete contentment. She had lived 73 years, and more than half of them had been marked by loneliness and struggle. But the last 30 years, the years with Lucas, had been filled with such love and joy and purpose that they outweighed all the rest. Lucas grieved deeply, as one would expect from a man who had lost the love of his life and his closest companion. But he did not crumble or give up. He continued managing the ranch alongside Thomas, continued being involved in his grandchildren's lives, continued supporting the school and the literacy programs Sarah had valued so highly. He kept her memory alive by living the way she would have wanted, with generosity and purpose and an openness to helping others who needed it. He lived another 8 years after Sarah's death, dying in his sleep at the age of 87 in the spring of 1901. His last conscious act was to hold the journal Sarah had kept, reading over her final entry one more time and smiling at the memory of the woman who had changed his life so completely. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a stone that reads simply, "Lucas Brennan, 1817–1901, and Sarah Greenwood Brennan, 1820–1893. Beloved husband and wife, parents and grandparents, they saw each other when the world looked away and built a love that endured." Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued the legacy they had begun. The ranch prospered for generations, always maintaining the culture of literacy and learning that Sarah had established. The Greenwood Brennan School operated for over 100 years, educating thousands of children who might otherwise have had no opportunity. And the story of how they met, of the cowboy who bought every unsold good from an ignored widow at a Christmas market, was told and retold through the generations, a reminder that kindness and love can appear in the most unexpected moments and change everything. Thomas, their eldest son, told the story to his children. "Your grandmother was invisible that day," he would say. Everyone walked past her as though she did not exist, but your grandfather saw her. He saw her worth, her potential, her goodness. And because he was brave enough to act on what he saw, all of us exist. Remember that. Remember to see people the way your grandfather saw your grandmother, to look past appearances and social expectations and see the truth of who someone is. That is the real legacy they left us. Catherine told the story differently. Grandmother never gave up, she would tell her students when she eventually became a teacher herself. Even when she had every reason to quit, when the world told her she had no value, she kept trying. She stood behind that stall all day, hoping for just one sale. And her perseverance was rewarded, not just with a sale but with love and a whole new life. Never give up on yourself. Never accept the world's judgment of your worth. Keep trying, keep hoping, and be ready when opportunity appears. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren grew up hearing these stories, internalizing the lessons about kindness and perseverance, and the importance of seeing the worth in every person. Many of them went on to do remarkable things, carrying forward the values Lucas and Sarah had instilled. Some became teachers, some became ranchers, some went into business or medicine or law. But all of them remembered where they came from, remembered the story of an invisible widow and a cowboy who saw her, and tried to live in ways that honored that legacy. The Brennan Ranch itself became something of a legend in Nevada, known as a place where fairness and opportunity mattered more than background or circumstance. People who struggled to find work elsewhere knew they could find a chance at the Brennan Ranch if they were willing to work hard and learn. The literacy programs continued and expanded, eventually becoming a formal school for ranch workers and their families. The library Lucas and Sarah had started, originally just a few shelves of books, grew into a substantial collection that served the entire surrounding community. On the 100th anniversary of Lucas and Sarah's wedding, in April of 1973, the family gathered at the ranch for a massive reunion. More than 200 descendants came, representing 5 generations of the family Lucas and Sarah had started. They held a ceremony at the gravesite on the hill, with the oldest grandchild still living, now in her 90s, telling the story one more time of how it all began. They were just 2 lonely people who found each other at exactly the right moment, she said, her voice wavering but clear. Grandma Sarah standing behind that market stall, believing she was invisible. Grandpa Lucas walking through the market, seeing someone the world had overlooked. He bought her goods, yes, but more than that, he gave her hope. He saw her value when she had forgotten she had any. And she gave him something equally precious in return. She taught him how to truly live again, how to open his heart after loss, how to build something meaningful beyond just accumulating wealth. Together, they created all of this. She gestured to the gathered family, to the ranch stretching out around them. Every single one of us exists because of one act of kindness on a cold December evening in 1863. Remember that. Remember what they taught us about seeing people truly, about loving generously, about building something that matters. That is their real legacy, more than the land or the money. It is us, and how we choose to live. The family celebrated that day, sharing stories and memories, creating new connections across the generations. Children who had only heard the story as a tale from long ago suddenly understood it as their history, the foundation on which their own lives were built. The invisible widow and the cowboy who saw her became real to them, not just characters in a story but real people who had loved and struggled and built something lasting. And on that hill, beneath the stone that marked their resting place, it was easy to imagine that Lucas and Sarah somehow knew what their love had created. That they could see the sprawling family, the successful ranch, the lives touched and changed by the programs they had started. That they understood their story had not ended with their deaths, but had continued growing and evolving, living on in every descendant who chose kindness over cruelty, generosity over selfishness, love over loneliness. The story of Sarah and Lucas became, over time, one of those family legends that gets told at every gathering, adapted and embellished, but never losing its essential truth. The invisible widow who was ignored at the Christmas market. The cowboy who saw her worth and bought every unsold good. The love that grew from that simple act of kindness, eventually creating a family and a legacy that spanned more than a century. It was a reminder, that story, that the small moments matter. That a single choice to be kind, to see someone truly, to reach out instead of walking past, can change everything. Not just for the people directly involved, but for all the generations that follow. Lucas and Sarah's act of mutual recognition and love did not just save two lonely people from despair. It created possibilities for hundreds of others, opportunities and lives that would never have existed otherwise. And perhaps that is the real point of the story, the reason it continued to be told long after everyone who knew Lucas and Sarah personally had died. It was a reminder that we are all connected, that our choices ripple outward in ways we cannot fully predict or control. That kindness matters, that love transforms, that seeing and being seen is one of the most powerful experiences human beings can share. The ranch still operates today, though much has changed since Lucas and Sarah's time. The cattle industry evolved, technology transformed ranching practices, and the family grew and diversified into different businesses and pursuits. But the core values remain, passed down through the generations. Fair treatment of workers, investment in education and opportunity, a commitment to seeing the worth in every person, regardless of their appearance or background. These are the real inheritances Lucas and Sarah left, more valuable than any land or money. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets behind the mountains in brilliant displays of orange and purple, people visiting the ranch claim they can sense something special about the place. A feeling of peace and love, of being seen and valued, of belonging to something larger than themselves. Maybe it is just imagination, the power of knowing the story and wanting to connect with it. Or maybe, just maybe, love that's strong and true leaves an imprint that does not fade with time. Either way, the story remains. An invisible widow standing alone at a Christmas market, her goods unsold and her hope fading. A cowboy who chose to see her, to recognize her worth, to take a chance on someone the world had dismissed. A love that grew from that choice, transforming two lonely lives into something beautiful and lasting. A family, a legacy, a reminder that we all have value if only someone will take the time to truly see us. And in the end, that is perhaps the greatest gift Lucas and Sarah gave to the world. Not the ranch or the school or the money, though those mattered too, but the example of what is possible when people choose love over indifference, connection over isolation, courage over fear. When they dare to see and be seen, to build something together that neither could have created alone. The invisible widow and the cowboy who saw her. Two unlikely people who found each other at exactly the right moment and changed everything. Their story ended long ago, but the love they created, the family they built, the values they lived by, those continue on, as real and vital today as they were that cold December evening in Empire City, Nevada, when everything changed because one man chose kindness and one woman chose to accept it. That is the power of love, of recognition, of refusing to let anyone remain invisible. It transforms everything, and it lasts forever.